What is it that that research, you've done research in the park, what is it that research does that affects people who come to visit a park?
Well, I think science and research is our best way of knowing about the world. And when we know about the world, we can live in it better. And because humans are responsible for a lot of what goes on, we can manage it better and make better policies. So a lot of what the Park Service is doing, for example, is foundational baseline research. And this helps us learn about the Rocky Mountain region, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. I mean, this area is known for its wildlife populations, and a lot of the work that the National Park Service is doing, Yellowstone spans 3 states, is foundational to tracking this ecosystem, the wildlife populations, the climate, the weather, and that brings people in, and that's an economic engine. And so with all these people coming in, not only do you not need to know about it to tell them and educate them about the world, which is critical, which helps them live in it, they could overrun the place and have too many people and destroy what we have. So all of that hinges on science or knowing about the world. That is fundamental to our existence in terms of living in the world.
So now you were involved in research on a project that was highly visible to people who visit the park, wolves. How might things that maybe aren't quite as visible have an effect on a visitor?
Living with wildlife is all about coexistence. And the only way you can coexist is to know about it. So a person coming here to a national park usually wants to learn about the environment. And it's an opportunity to educate them about living wherever they might be. So a lot of park research programs, the park is really good, and it's a fundamental mission, is to communicate with people, to educate with people. Well, what are you going to educate them about? Well, what's in the park? So the Park Service is built around learning about the park and telling people about it. And that's a multiplying effect for the country. It's well known that parks are just loved by people. They're in a lot of ways overcrowded, but it's a great opportunity to educate the public about what they're doing to the world, how to live in the world. And there's nothing more popular than a national park. I mean, hundreds of millions of people are visiting them every year in the US. That's an opportunity we got to seize by giving people information. And so the government does a great job at monitoring long-term conditions over time. I mean, Yellowstone's over 150 years old. Yosemite's over 100 years old. These places have been keeping track of the world, those little pieces of the world, for that long. And there's not many other places in the United States or even the world that has that kind of track record. That is a valuable piece of information of how humans live in the world, what we're doing to the world, how we fit into the world. That's how important National Park Service research is.
Just from your experience in the park, if, say, the research programs you were involved with would go away, how would that affect the park? What would you see that causing in 5 years, 10 years?
One of the research projects I was involved in Yellowstone is elk. And there's nothing more iconic and important to wildlife management in the tri-state area of Idaho, Montana, Wyoming than elk. They're ecosystem drivers, they're sources of recreational opportunity, they're cultural and spiritual. And Yellowstone National Park has the longest research program on elk as anybody. It goes back to the late 1800s, looking at elk populations, monitoring the migration, radio collaring, counting them, figuring out better ways to count them. That's all a park program. And there's about 7 elk herds that use Yellowstone, and all of them are transboundary. They move in and out of the park. So understanding elk in Yellowstone impacts the entire region and the people who live there, because that's a very important resource to those people. That's just one example. I was involved with wolves. There's nothing more controversial than wolves. We wouldn't be able to manage them. We wouldn't be able to live with them unless we knew something about them, unless we knew how many elk they killed in a year, what they're doing to the elk population. These are all societal issues that the Park Service is getting on top of and staying with. They're not short-term blip studies like a lot of universities do. That's valuable, but the Park Service is able to set up long-term monitoring over decades of just being there every year. And that is extraordinarily important that other aspects of society are not addressing. The government is very good at that, particularly the National Park Service.
I've got one last question here that maybe you're not going to feel free to answer, and that is, I know you're in touch with people in science, in the park, in the Park Service. How is just talk about all of this affecting those folks?
Not good, because science and research depends on clear thinking. It depends on stability. It depends upon you knowing you're going to be there tomorrow. This chaos for, in some ways, no reason throws all that out the window. When you're worried about your job tomorrow or next month, you're not thinking clearly about the problem at hand. You're spending time doing other things, preserving your job, going to meetings, instead of thinking clearly about baseline research, gathering data, what's the next problem on the horizon, what's going wrong here with my research system. That's what knowledge and science and research is supposed to think about. Not, am I going to have an office tomorrow? Am I going to have a job tomorrow? How am I going to feed my family? And that's what's hurting us now. You need to keep those people stable, secure, and thinking about what's important.